we can't fix the messaging. It's too complicated. So let's just change the logo and the colors. And I was like, that's so backwards.
Hello and welcome to episode 223 of the Rockstar CMO effing marketing podcast. It's Saturday, the 22nd of June. Hope you've had a good week and you are well and staying as sane as you feel you need to be. I'm your host, Ian Truscott. I'm not a rock star, but I am a fractional CMO and advisor. And in a moment, you'll hear from two of my favourite marketing consulting chums, Jeff Clark and Robert Rose, who share their marketing street knowledge that will inspire your inner rock star. Come say hello. You can find links to us, our work, and all the things we discuss in the show notes at rockstarcmo.com. And we are proud members of the Marketing Podcast Network. This week, Jeff and I revisit the first time I interviewed him for the show back on episode 40, before I joined Robert in the Rockstar CMO virtual bar for a splendid cocktail, and he shares his thought for the week on marketing strategy. But first, we need to pay the bar tab. I'll be back in a moment.
We'll be right back.
We'll be right back.
Right, let's get on with the show with the first segment, the Marketing Studio, with Jeff Clark, our resident strategist and former research director at Forrester Serious Decisions.
Hello, Ian. Welcome to the Rockstar CMO studio.
Thanks, mate. How are you?
I am doing well, and it's just the fact, when we're looking at our notes and to see this is episode 223 is it's wild. That's all I can say.
It is. It is wild. It is wild. And that is what we're going to get to for this episode, because I did promise the listeners, or we did decide after our conversation last week, that we'd revisit your very first appearance on here, which was in episode 40, which is 183 or so weeks ago, because I think we've recorded every week.
Was that back in 1999 or something like that?
No, it was actually the 12th of December 2020 when that came out. So episode 40 was back then. And just to give some context, because I started this podcast as a COVID project. We were still in and out of COVID lockdowns, if anybody remembers that. Life Goes On by BTS, which I'm not familiar with at all, was number one on the Billboard 100, and I think the UK was already gearing up for the holidays, as Mariah Carey was number one here with All I Want for Christmas Is You. It seems to be number one.
Is that number one every Christmas season in the UK?
Is that or Wham and Last Christmas? I don't think. And
yeah.
I'm proud of the fact that we haven't used either of those tracks on the show in the last 108 weeks.
Very smart.
So we're going to. What I was thinking about is we'd revisit that episode, and I was thinking, good Lord, it's 3.5 years ago. We must have learnt something since then. Things must have changed. But when I listened back and I pulled the transcript and I shared that with you, I think you really set the editorial tone back then, because you covered 5 effing things before we'd invented 5 effing things. And unsurprisingly, you nailed some classics I think have really stood the test of time. And actually, we've been discussing for the next 180 weeks. So what say you, Jeff?
Well, what can I say? It's like after I gave it a second listen, it's like I agree, and I was like, I was thinking, wow, we sound smarter than I thought we were. Because you're right. It's like, well, because of the nature of the program, Rockstar CMO. I mean, we're teeing up topics that are of interest to CMOs, and it's kind of like just laid the basis and laid the rhythm track that we were able to build on for the next 180 episodes.
You see, as a musician, you're way better at the music analogies than I am. Hey, you know what we forgot? Is how's the weather?
Oh, the weather. Well, it is. You told me to turn the fan off because it's hot here and hot and sunny. Mm-hmm. I mean, we're actually kind of at the end of a heat wave, but it's still hot.
I heard Northeast America was having a heat wave.
The Northeast is, it's going to be 89 degrees Fahrenheit today. Wow. And the sun's out, so it's heating up.
Well, we better get on with this so you don't melt and can turn that fan back on. But here it's fairly normal, temperate.
Yeah,
the sun shines out. It's
Good, we're coming over.
All right. So the first thing you covered with the when we're having our chat, and actually, I would encourage people to go back and listen to that. This isn't the purpose of this. Perhaps we should have this conversation again. But I quite liked your path into marketing as well. So if regular listeners remember the way that I used to interview when we used to have different guests, is we talk about your path to marketing, what inspired you, and I thought that was great. But we quickly got into the first question, which was the challenges for the CMO. What are the top challenges for CMOs? And you talked about how many CMOs struggle because they bring a narrow focus from previous roles. So often we're all specialists, aren't we? Especially in larger organizations, we own demand, or we own field, or we own brand, or something like that. And then we become CMOs. So is that still, do you think, the case?
I think it's kind of a natural that CMOs typically come up through the marketing organization, and so they're either going to be a comms and brand and PR focus, or a demand focus, or product, maybe in product positioning, and so that's just natural, and I think the challenge then becomes you're in charge of the whole organization. You might have even been hired by you're here to solve a problem. Yeah. We're not feeding sales well enough with engagement and leads and blah, blah, blah. So therefore, that's why we're hired. And so the one thing you want to be able to do so that you don't become a 1 year, 2 year term CMO is say, well, I'll help solve that. But there's definitely a broader mix of things that marketing can contribute to the organization, and so you have to yourself become better, skilled in kind of what those things are, and be able to communicate that, because you got to run a team that's doing more than just filling a funnel, or doing a brand there's, I think back in that episode I talked about some people who followed me at a company where it was just like, they kept doing rebrand, and it's like, whoa, that doesn't do a bit to hit the bottom line.
And the right expression there is you've got to become T-shaped, haven't you, as a marketer? It's all right to have your specialism and be able to be sort of the alpha marketer in a particular, but you really do need to spread yourself across, don't you? And
the T metaphor is a perfect one for this.
And then also in that section, when I was listening back, you also talked about the importance of aligning marketing strategies with the overall company objectives. And this is a topic we've definitely hit a few times. But the other thing you mentioned, which I think is the critical part that sometimes we miss, is the effective communication of these, not just to the C-suite, which we're often talking about, but also to the marketing team, right?
Yeah, and I think that's the need to understand how corporate business objectives relate to our marketing, the business, the parts of the business that the marketing can support, and then our goals within that, and then each of those goals typically ladder down to one or two kind of functional leaders who they've got a role to play in helping us hit that goal, and they have people who report to them. So communicating that down and helping people understand their role in executing against the business strategy, even if your role is, creative services designer, it's like, you've got to make everybody feel that they're part of what the business is trying to accomplish. Otherwise they just kind of focus kind of on their narrow area, and it's like, I'm going to try to make the best web pages possible, and not that that's a bad thing, but is that how is that helping execute on the company's strategy and its success?
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of things on that. I think, and the first of those is it's particularly important if you're implementing change as a CMO, right? Is because people do get a little bit uncertain about their own future if there's change happening in the business, and you're kind of restructuring or making changes to what people do. And I think the other thing, can't remember if we're going to touch on this, but I think this is where the stuff that we often talk about OKRs, goals and stuff, has got a ladder into everybody, hasn't it? Yeah,
and that's one of the things I used to admire about how some marketing resource management tools were set up is this, this idea that it's like you can actually show how goals go from, the top level down to, what the web designer is trying to do.
Yeah.
And, and then be able to report back up. And it's, it can be somewhat of a complex exercise, but it is essentially supporting what you want everyone to realize, that their objectives, are part of that larger story. And I was at a company where we effectively did this from a review standpoint. So you kind of put in the marketing goals in the review, and here's what your role is in doing that goal, and here's what your role is in doing, goal 1, 2, 3, 4. So it can be very helpful from a HR standpoint as well as from a marketing execution standpoint.
Also, all of that stuff is great. I mean, we're still on number 1. Aren't we?
Are we still on number 1?
But
this was part 2 of number 1.
Yeah, but I think that I will move on to number 2. But the importance of this, the importance of all of that foundational stuff that we talk about a lot in enabling you to say no and keeping people aligned is so important. But anyway, the second thing I asked for, and this may merge into that, is I asked you about advice for new CMOs. And I think that this very much is related to what you were just saying, is to understand and articulate how marketing can provide value to the executive team and the company more broadly, right? Is not just being the most senior marketer at the C-suite, but actually what you do. Yeah.
Yep. And I think this is, we touched on this, I don't know, it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, because it was something that popped up in a blog from Grant Johnson, friend of the show and former boss of ours, that the importance of educating the rest of the executive team on what the role of marketing is in contributing to the business, because certain executives, we've talked about before, sometimes they just think marketing is just a cost center. We spend money. Shit happens. I don't know. Some think that they know marketing. I've watched advertisements or whatever. I see how the big guys do it. So, we can do this.
Yeah.
And again, if you came in as a brand guy or a demand guy, and that's what they think you're there to do, there is going to be some education required, which requires you to kind of do the work as you're involved working with your colleagues and the executive team on building the strategy for the company. And as you're communicating it down, you want to be able to educate the executive team on, ways that marketing contribute that they may not have thought about. And this kind of sets you up for the reporting, the success metrics you're going to report back over the next year or so. Because, they may think that brands, certainly I've been in a lot of companies where they thought brand was kind of a waste of time. And it's like, but we got a bad reputation. So, so you got to work on that. And that affects demand. And sometimes these things may be hard to measure, but it's important to educate people on its importance.
Oh, absolutely, particularly brand, because brand is a multiplier of so many of the activities that we do in marketing, isn't it? And I think brand is often just labelled as the logo and the crayons and the colouring in department, but really a strong brand helps your pay-per-click strategy, because they're going to be offered 5 options, and if they've heard of you, they'll click through to you. So your PPC actually performs better if you've got a stronger brand.
It makes it easier for salespeople to close deals.
Yeah, absolutely. But maybe we need to revisit brand another day. Oh, and I think we've gone 12 minutes without saying rabbit hole. So that's a good.
you just fixed that.
So that's good for us. And then in that conversation 180 weeks ago, you also talked about this sort of development of the strategy that aligns with the company's long-term goals and communicate this within the marketing team.
Yeah.
But it's balanced with practical execution, which I liked. And so I really pulled that out from the transcript and listening. And I wonder if we should talk about that a bit more on future podcasts, about that practical execution, because we certainly talk a lot about a strategy that aligns with the company's long-term goals.
Yeah. But we've certainly, the good is that, what is it? Perfection is the enemy of the good. And I think back in that episode, I recounted a a presentation I heard from a guy who had been the former CEO of Porsche, who that was one of his learnings, was that a good strategy, well executed, gets you farther than trying to get the perfect strategy and not executing well.
Yes.
And it's probably impossible to have the perfect strategy, which is perfectly executed. So you don't want to even strive for that. And and I think that is so important. I mean, that's a philosophy of agile marketing. That's I mean, it's just, I think it's good policy to say, we want to focus on strategy, but if we spend all of our cycles and our brain cells trying to get the perfect strategy, we're just going to, well, for one, we probably will start our planning, 2 months into the year. I mean, it just it slows everything down, and it gets people too hung up on, it probably gets people too hung up on debating what the strategy should be.
Absolutely.
And in the, and again, in the spirit of being agile, whether we're talking about an agile process model or where we're just talking about the adjective itself, it's like you got to be able to, set goals and start work, and then see how things work and change if they're not working. So yes, I think that's, after we just spent a couple, 10 minutes talking about strategy.
Well,
that's the important thing to remember.
Well, I mean, I think I'm at this point contractually obliged to say the words "building the plane while you're flying it."
Yes.
But
that's in our brand manifesto.
Yeah, but it is absolutely. But it is it is a bit like that long and short of it thing. Is that yes, we need to be working on strategy, and we do need to be putting those things in place. But there needs to be a tactical work stream and a practical work stream that's happening, which is getting the shit done this quarter. Well, you can't stop the merry-go-round, can you? You need to kind of make sure that balance is happening. And the other thing I find sometimes is that the strategy conversation kind of dies with the practical, because we just get consumed and get onto the hamster wheel, and we never quite finish the strategy stuff. And I think it's incredibly important as much as the hamster wheel and getting stuff done, right?
Yeah. It's funny because that made me think of the fact that, a lot of times, a marketing team will start the planning session by saying what worked last year and what didn't work. And the problem, if you kind of leave it there, is that, well, what worked for last year's strategy versus what's going to work. So if we have a new strategy, or even if it's just an evolution, it's like you got to say, well, what's going to work in the context of what we need to accomplish in this coming year.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about goals and objectives of the company, isn't it? And those things shift from one year to the next. And then, well, anyway, so then listening to that conversation, we then got on to our third point for today, which was about team and resource management. You made some really good points here. You talked about the structure of the marketing team based on functional models, but seeing what needs tweaking to align with the business objectives. So I think what I was hearing here is it's very easy, especially if you're a new CMO, to come in and say, well, I've got my blueprint and this is where all the pieces are going to sit, because that's my blueprint. But it seemed like you were saying something different.
Well, I think that's an obvious starting point. And, when you're trying to, benchmark yourself against, other marketing best practices, that it's like, what are the functional roles? Even if you're looking at different business models, like subscription-based or target account marketing, there's kind of like a general concept of what the functional roles should be. But I think that, one of the first things to think about is what's our gap analysis. I often talk about, because when we talk about planning, we talk about, if I've got goals, what are the dependencies I have to meet those goals? Do I need to upskill people? Do I need to fix processes, buy technology, yada yada, and so that will raise some of the people issues in the people, process, and technology equation, and so you could say, well, okay, now I need to kind of alter my functional model to fill in those gaps, or that could be you need to acquire new people, hire people, etc. But you also need to think about, and this is one of the things I'm not sure we've talked about very much, is think about the cross-functional roles.
Yeah.
I mean, we certainly, in our various topics we've covered. We've mentioned like campaign managers or agile scrum masters or project like chief product officers,
frontline marketing leaders,
and frontline marketers. These are all roles that don't fit into a functional model, and at least not neatly. I mean, you could say, well, some of these things fit under marketing ops, or some of them fit under field and digital team, or so. I mean, you could make them fit, but the main thrust of these positions is that they are to work cross functionally to make sure specific things get done. We're running a campaign. It goes across all of our different marketing functions in terms of who's contributing. Somebody's got to be at the hub of that process, or we're doing it using agile methods. Okay, or maybe we're doing all of our digital based on agile. Okay, that's got to pull in the creative team and the web team and the field team perhaps. So those, I think that's something that we may not have. That I think is part of that team resource management discussion that we haven't covered a lot, but it's certainly it's a potential gap.
Yeah, and I think when we had the conversation, and maybe I'll include a link to this in the show notes as well, because we just alluded to it about the conversation about frontline marketing and this idea that Forrester have, that there is somebody who's responsible for all the campaigns, all the touches that are on any prospects and customers across all of the functions. So that does seem to be developing as an idea, isn't it? These functional roles.
Absolutely.
And they're not cross-functional roles as in like tiger teams and stuff. This is a senior leadership role within the marketing team, isn't it?
Absolutely. They've got and they may not only have to, manage, maybe not directly manage people within marketing, but they may have a very significant role in liaising with people in the other functions of the organization, sales, services, etc.
Yeah. I was a bit skeptical of it all when we chatted, and I've actually wrote a couple of articles, and one of them for CMS Wire, and it actually got the attention of somebody at Forrester who got in touch, and I had a chat with them, and
look, somebody likes that idea.
And it was really cool, actually. I thought it was, I was surprised to have a Forrester analyst reach out and listen to
they're trolling you.
A peon like myself. So it was a good conversation. Anyway, that's not tooting my own frontline marketing horn, but yes, but that's that point there about these cross-functional roles. And one of the things I've found, actually, as I'm working with a startup, so a much smaller team at the moment, and you mentioned in our conversation back then about agencies and freelancers. And I also think that when you look at that gap analysis you were talking about, it's not always going to be a full-time hire, because
absolutely.
So what I'm doing at the moment is it's almost like a portfolio marketing team, in that I'm bringing in specialists that we need, because today's labor market, everybody's fucking fractional, right? So there's a lot of talent around that you can get for just a couple of days a week, or just for a short-term project, or whatever, to solve those kind of immediate problems.
But a lot of people are turning up at their psychiatrists with split personality disorder. I don't know if I'm a digital marketer or a film marketer.
Well, I was chatting to a consultant that's helping me at the moment, this lady Adiola, who might listen, and she's splendid, and she was saying, she was explaining to somebody what fractional means. I think it's somebody in her family. It's just part-time.
Yeah, really.
Just a part-time marketer.
You mean like the checkout person at the grocery store?
Exactly.
Yeah,
just they're a fractional customer service agent. But anyway, yes. So, what did you have anything to add to that point that you're making about it?
Well, I think that it basically comes back to doing the same kind of analysis of the dependencies and where you're short on skills or processes in this case, or maybe sometimes people outsource. Maybe they outsource their whole marketing automation to an organization because they don't want to buy the technology internally. It's an outgrowth, and it is, based on whether you can afford the part or full-time hire, or whether you want to own the process versus, it's like, I don't know. I mean, certainly some cases a CMO working with a PR agency, can do all the kind of the press and social stuff they need, particularly in a small organization, before it's like time to hire. So yeah, that comes into the, do we hire it? Do we contract? I mean, certainly I've done a lot of work where I've contracted to somebody for, whatever, half-time, three-quarter time, whatever. Yeah. And, it fills the gap. And then if strategy changes and you don't need that contractor anymore, then you can shift easier.
Absolutely. And then shift that budget into another, to plug another hole that you've noticed in your little marketing boat, right? Yeah. So, yeah. And I mean, we're always talking about gap analysis, and it's important for everything, isn't it? And particularly with skills. And I also think if you're growing or transitioning a team, then it may be too soon for you to commit to a particular headcount outlay, and therefore bringing in somebody on a fractional basis or a consultant in, you can really figure out what is your need, because somebody with that expertise comes in and helps you with that. Because like you said, we CMOs need to be generalists. We're not going to be the expert, are we? And we won't necessarily know what we need. So that's cool. And then of course, the fourth point that we touched on when we chatted, and this is consistent whenever we chat, and this is whether we're recording or not, is we're always discussing technology and marketing technology and MarTech. And of course, that conversation is no different. So you mentioned some really good points about technology and MarTech. What were your points from them?
Well, I think, there's the short story would be that, particularly as you're thinking about how you grow, is that there's the common tools that every marketing organization needs. They need to have access to if they don't own the CRM system. They need to build websites and other digital properties. They need, marketing automation platforms and, things that enable them to start doing outbound and, engagement. And you should always evaluate your MarTech against your business objectives. Really should always inventory what you have, because MarTech is very easy to get out of control and not know, when, renewing subscriptions are due, or the fact that you've got additional services that are required in addition to the subscriptions. And you want to avoid that unnecessary technology sprawl. But what the best practice is to be able to get into the habit of building roadmaps of what are our investments going to be against our business objectives. So again, you do the gap analysis, and we've got dependencies on doing certain new tools to execute certain marketing programs. Can I buy them all and implement them in Q1 of the year? Probably not. So what's my plan to invest over time? And I know when we were at one of the companies that we both worked at, there was a lot of work we were doing on the website. And, we had multi-year roadmaps as to, acquiring things, just developing things, just implementing, functionality of the tools we had. And so it may, the warning is it may take years to get there. And people, when I was putting people up for awards at Forrester Series Decisions, it's like the people who did a really good job at this were people that looked out over a multi-year and they would rationalize, like the CMO says, shouldn't we buy this tool right now? And they'd say, no, we need to wait. This is kind of like, I remember the one I'm thinking of is when ABM technology was hot, and they're like, should we buy this ABM tool? And it's like, well, we don't even have any ABM marketers. So let's get the marketers on board first. And then we buy the tool. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's important.
I think years is a scary thing for any marketer to consider, but I do think it is the right tool at the right time. And taking that, because we're all magpies as marketers, and we're all keen to be on the cutting edge and understanding what's going on, and we see something new, or you have a platform when it's got a set of reports. Well, those set of reports must be important reports. But actually, you need to talk to the business and say, well, what is it that we actually need to do? And I've had a number of these situations. I think part of the problem when we were together about it was a years long roadmaps because the developers took so fucking long to get anything done. But I digress. Yeah.
It was and it was because the other important point in your gap analysis is the data you have, and one of the issues, because we were talking, we're specifically talking about implementing personalization and targeting, and it's like if you don't have the right data. In the right data model, then you can't implement. Even if the tool can do it, you can't do it.
Exactly. And personalization is a great is a great example of this, that we all want to do it as marketers, but actually the implication is you need way more content as well, right? So the whole thing just blows up, and you may not be there, and you've got to really think about, well, is it going to move the needle on what I'm trying to get done, or doesn't it? So I'm there. There's something we could really get back to, isn't it? The technology and Martech. And I've actually been. I'm not tooting my own horn again, but I've been invited to collaborate in a one chapter in a book, and I missed a meeting, and they gave me the chapter that I have to write about, which is sticking to your marketing strategy despite technological changes. So I'm really into this. I'm going to be picking your brains a bit more about that, I think. Anyway, so
just ask ChatGPT.
Well, I think that's really interesting, because I think ChatGPT was one of those things, right? Which is the problem that like I said, I think us marketers are naturally curious and are magpies, and there's nothing wrong with that. But sometimes we find a solution and we look for the problem that it's going to solve, right? Rather than list our problems and choose the technology to fit. So we see something cool and we think, what's the problem that's solving for me, so I can justify it to the business? And I think ChatGPT was a bit like that. Anyway, so let's get to finally to point number 5. And this is where, if you're a regular listener, you might remember when I did more interviews, we had a regular feature on the Rockstar CMO, the Rockstar CMO swimming pool, the portal to hell for all the BS, snake oil and overhyped trends that plague this craft we love. Notice I had to read it because it's so long since I've said it. And back then you chucked in branding, specifically the constant need for CMOs to rebrand, and you actually touched on it near the beginning of this conversation.
I did touch on that earlier. I think it was fresh in my mind at that point. Yeah. But that is and even actually also there was a client I was working with at the time where we were doing a rebranding, and it's like, and it seemed to be the right thing to do, but I had to keep asking myself. It's like I've been critical about people that come into a CMO role, and it's like the first thing they want to do is change the colors and the logo and the and without doing any research to say why the current version of anything is good, bad, or indifferent. Yeah. And but when posed this question again, my gut reaction was to throw in generative AI, and then I thought, wait, am I just being a stick in the mud, or why? Is that? And again, I know we've touched on some of the challenges with it. So anyway, I decided to consult the authorities on hype, the Gartner.
Well, let's stick to the one you threw in last time, and then let's go to the one that you want. So and I agree with you. This perpetual need to it's like when we were selling web content management, we just knew this new CMO would come in, chuck out the existing brand, and with it the technology as well, right? So you knew that there was going to be the point to change. And actually, I'm working with a client, and there was an assumption that there would be a rebrand, and we evaluated the value of that and paused it and thought that budget could go into something better. For now, we can do that in 2025. And the other thing I think about, because it's not branding and strategy you're throwing into the pool, it's this constant change. And I think that I wrote about this recently as well, is we get bored by our own messaging and marketing. Yep. But the audience doesn't do that. They need to see it 7, 8, 15, 20 times. It needs to be in market for 18 months. And by the time we've seen it for 6 months, we're like, right, what's next?
And often the focus is on the visual, and as opposed to the messaging, and because it's the messaging that's more important in terms of your impact and engaging prospects and customers. Yeah. And I remember going through a rebranding exercise where it's like, okay, we can't fix the messaging. It's too complicated. So let's just change the logo and the colors. And it was like, that's so backwards. And we did it anyway. It is. To me, it's like the messaging is the thing where it's like you say, okay, if we're changing our strategy, or we know we didn't get the messaging right, then that's where you start. And then if somehow you look antiquated or out of step with the market with your visual brand, then then you start, working on that.
All right.
Because you actually want that the messaging brand to be the information that goes to your creative service team or the agency.
Yes.
To do the visual rebranding work.
Right. Well, it sounds to me like you would still chuck that in, but what if I was to ask you again, and I think you started bleeding into this just a minute ago, what would you chuck in today?
Generative AI.
Right.
And again, I'll it's like, it was one of those things that was like the first thing that came to my head.
Yeah.
And then I said, well, I should check in with the the authorities on hype. Yeah. And so I looked at the Gartner 2024 hype cycle for digital marketing, and right at the top of the hype curve was generative AI for marketing. And so my rationale for throwing it into the pool is that you need to think about, I mean, you can do things more efficiently or quicker, but if I'm in a market and I'm talking about a product or a solution and I'm using ChatGPT and my competitor is using ChatGPT and then it's like we're all going to sound the same. And that is a real messaging problem. If everybody, and we've talked about this before, because, like we've been working in markets where it's like everybody from a CRM system to web, content management system to a marketing tool, we're all talking about, personalized engagement. And it's like, but you're all doing different things, but you're all saying the same thing. Yeah. So, you really have to get into the, what are the needs of my customer? What's my brand voice? What am I saying about what my solution is? And you can certainly use AI to help you build on that, but you've got to give it a strong foundation. And I don't think most marketing teams are at that point to use it appropriately. Yeah, and I'm sure there are some out there, but I haven't talked to any yet.
Well, it's a great point. I mean, the use case seems to be just create more content, and we know the world doesn't need more content. And not just more content, but more shit content and more beige Me Too B2B content, and we've got plenty of that. Thank you. So I don't think so. I think
it gets harder to find the good stuff when you have more of the crappy stuff.
So I think that's a good call. So generative AI for marketing needs to go in the pool, which is fantastic.
But I do have to add that since it's summer and it's hot, I think it's okay to put it in the pool and let it have a holiday, and we'll fish it out later.
Yeah. Well, I think everybody's kind of tired of hearing about it, so you're probably right. It will come back. It'll come back as something a bit more practical, I think. All right, so that was the 5 effing things that we discussed when you were last on the show in episode 40. I will, of course, include a link to episode 40 so people can hear about your background and all the other things we discussed. And so the last point on our agenda is, what song are we going for, Jeff?
Well, I think, given our brand, Rockstar CMO Advisor, and given that we were talking about CMOs, I put 2 and 2 together and found a song from last year called Rockstar, which was from a artist who is probably not from last year, but Dolly Parton. So she's been around a while, and so she's learned a few things, but she has, it's really kind of interesting. She was she was putting out a rock album as a country singer, and but she's got a great line in this: "Don't you ever give up on your dreams, no matter how far-fetched they seem. They may not be all that extreme. So if you're dreaming to be a rock star CMO, listen to Dolly and also listen to our podcast."
Splendid. All right, well, I'll play out with that. And will you be welcoming me to the studio next week?
See?
All right, then. I'll see you then.
Okay.
School, I know the rules, do my chores in a hurry. My radio, my records, waiting up my sanctuary. A teenage dreamer dreaming one day I could be a star. I close my door, turn on my amp, and plug in my guitar. I'm a rock star. They say if you can dream it.
Thank you, Jeff. That was a little bit of Dolly Parton and Rockstar, which frankly are words I never expected to say. But Jeff made an appropriate choice there. If you want to learn more about Jeff's background, I'll include a link to episode 40 in the show notes. His journey into marketing was really quite interesting. Right, from one rockstar to the other, it's that time of the week to retire to the Rockstar CMO virtual bar for a cocktail and a chat with my chum, Robert Rose, Chief Troublemaker at the Content Advisory. Good evening, Robert. What are you drinking?
Oh, hello, my friend. Holy smokes. Okay, so I'm so pleased that you've honored me. Knowing what a Star Trek fan I am, you have honored me with all of the whole set here, sounds and all of the ambiance of the, basically the bridge of the Enterprise, the music, the everything. You've got everything going here, which is all Star Trek all the time. It's just fantastic. And you've gone for the original series too, which is really just something that's really, really just fantastic. So thank you for that. That's just wonderful.
You're very welcome. I don't know how I'm going to do this, but you're very welcome. But of course, I'm going to theme the bar into one of the things you enjoy the most. You spend so much time in here; it would be rude not to. Thank you.
There it is. Yeah.
Thank you for coming.
That's lovely. All right. So we have a great drink though to celebrate this. Our cocktail this week is a lovely one. It is called a Bordeaux Sour. And so, of course, a whiskey sour, and, you've got, of course, the whiskey, and then you've got a little egg white or whatever you put in there, and then a sweetener, and a citrus of sorts. And then there's all sorts of things to riff on that. This is a Bordeaux sour, and you're going to find out why we call it a Bordeaux sour here in just a moment. But we start with whatever your favorite bourbon is, 2 parts of that, or 3 parts, depending on how much you want to drink here. But a couple 2 ounces, 2 parts of Maker's Mark. If that's your bourbon, or really any of your bourbons that you really like, then here comes the namesake, a 1 part of Bordeaux red wine. Basically, put a little red wine into this bourbon. Yeah, no, really, for sure. A little lemon juice, a little orange bitters, and then, of course, if you need a sweetener, I don't love this sweetener, you can put a little bit of maple syrup in there, or a maraschino cherry, or something that gives it a little more sweet. I like orange bitters does enough of the sweetness for me, and the wine certainly has enough sweetness for me. But that's up to you. That's up to taste.
Wow.
But there you go. It's a very easy drink to make. You put all that into a shaker, shake it up over ice, pour it into a glass, and you can either pour it over ice or you can pour it with just one big rock, is how I prefer it. And it makes a lovely, lovely, very, very sophisticated drink.
Wow. I don't think I've ever had a cocktail with red wine in it before. That sounds really interesting.
It's very nice. It's very nice, yeah. And I would say normally you would say don't use a very expensive wine, but I would use a good Bordeaux. I mean, Bordeaux's don't typically come cheap anyway, but yeah, a good Bordeaux is good.
Nice. Well, that sounds fantastic. And where are we going to be drinking these Bordeaux sours, my friend?
Well, we should. I mean, where else would we go? I mean, we have to go to Bordeaux. Yeah, of course. And so we will go to France.
Yes.
And then they've just, I think probably Parliament there is still completely dismantled, so we don't have to worry about strikes or anything like that for the moment. So we'll get out into the French countryside and sit out there and drink some of these.
Do you think that they would let us put bourbon in their red wine? Do you think that might not strike some kind of revolution?
That's true. That's true. That is a great point. Actually, we might be arrested. Yeah, I could see us very quickly getting arrested for doing something like that.
We're probably not the most popular people in France anyway. You being American, me being British. But yes, I think that might tip them over the edge.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, so we've managed to find a friendly bar that will allow us to sully their red wine. And conversation turns marketing. What are we talking about this week?
Well, I want to talk a little bit about content marketing strategy. And so one of the things that I've been noticing a little bit, it's over the last 6 months, it's been really kind of, honestly, a little bit barren in terms of new projects that I'm seeing get launched, or new innovations like new owned media, new digital magazines, new resource centers, new things. And so they become a bit of a I don't know whether it's just frustration or whether it's, companies are a little scared at the moment, or there's a little bit of like, well, we don't know what's going on with AI at the moment. But, the sort of the launch of new interesting publications or owned media properties by brands have been pretty lackluster. Mm-hmm. But I'm starting to see that change a little bit, where we're starting to see people really get interested in that again and interesting in launching it up. And what made me think of it was because somebody said to me, well, we're going to have to do this, but and it's the classic, we're going to have to build the airplane while we fly it, right? Mm-hmm, yeah. And so and it's like, okay, that's nice. But it's not, as it turns out, the successful ones aren't doing that. And here's what I mean by that. So the whole build the airplane while we fly it ostensibly means we're going to build a new channel, or we're going to build a new thing while we manage our existing channels, right? And this is always the problem that content teams have, which is we're busy doing other stuff. And so we're trying to get other teams to help us launch this thing, whether it be demand gen or the brand team or the web team or whoever it is. And they don't have any extra bandwidth or resources. So we're trying to do this thing as we fly everything else that exists and launch this brand new thing, new incremental thing that's going to be awesome, right? And so for example, I worked with there was a B2B company in the technology space, and they were basically looking to launch this new enabler content, right? Content that helps their potential customers become better at their jobs, right? So that they can use their software better and do all that stuff. And they sort of said, okay, well, who can do that? Well, we got their digital team and our PR team. They can help because they've got some resources available. Okay, well, what are they going to do? Well, they might modify the existing PR newsroom, or they might modify the existing website to do stuff. And so they've got technology for that. And they've got, sort of it's like, yes, we can build this airplane while we're flying these existing things. But of course, neither of those things is optimal for this new thing that they want to build, right? This new, this new sort of publication that they want to build to enable. It should be more like a learning management system or a university or a class or something like that. And so they struggled with this whole thing because they're trying to build this airplane while they're flying it, but they're not trying to build an airplane. They're actually trying to build a new, a new kind of aircraft, right? Maybe they're trying to build a blimp, or, I don't want to belabor the metaphor too far, but basically the interesting thing is that when you go back and you look, one of the things that I always advise clients to think about when they're building a new content marketing strategy is to not look at all the planes they have in the sky and say, how do we build another plane? But rather, how do we sort of look full stop to build an airplane factory on the ground, right? How are we building airplanes right now, full stop? In other words, stop looking at the next version of whatever it is you have, and instead look at a new version of something that hasn't existed before. Because if you're going to get value out of it, that's where you're going to get value out of it, right? You're not going to, if you're really looking to do something new, then you can only create something new if you sort of stop creating the things that you've been creating and sort of build it from the ground up. And so if we start thinking about that, well, that means not just new looks and feels and websites and blogs, but it means a new team, focused on new editorial, focused on with new technology, focused on new structures that might impact the planes that are in the sky. So in other words, it's building new planes from the ground up, new aircraft from the ground up, and rather figuring out how that new capability to build new planes can help you improve the planes you already have in the sky. So taking that different bit of a look at it is the way to start to think about building this new blog or this new resource center and those sorts of things, taking a step back and saying, how do we build things full stop? Now we can start really thinking about building something new and innovative.
Yeah. Is that because, is that a management and budgeting problem, do you think, there? Because we're, and a lack of commitment to the new idea. We're just going to sort of ease our way into it, and we're going to put a little bit of money and we're going to fiddle about. Whereas what you're saying is there is going to be a decision made. We're not going to stop what we're doing now. We're going to do something that's additive, and you're not going to see the benefit for a few months, and then we'll start phasing out the things that we're doing. Is that Is that
generally speaking? That's exactly right. Yeah, generally speaking, that's exactly right. I think it's basically saying, we want, it's not understanding where, there's the whole sort of, I think it comes out of Rational Rose or whatever. It's the 5 whys, right? When you talk about, why is something broken? Why aren't there lights in the, in the kitchen, right? Well, because the light bulb's out. Well, why is the light bulb out? Well, because we didn't actually replace the light bulbs in time. Okay, well, why didn't we replace the light bulbs on time? Well, we didn't do that because nobody's responsible for actually getting new light bulbs. Aha, that's the problem we're trying to solve, right? We're not trying and so in many cases, what businesses do, and I think your point is a good one, is instead of asking the 5 whys, instead of getting down to what the real problem is in terms of, they think, we can just very quickly budget for something new and we'll just sort of hack it together with what we got. And that'll save us money and time but what they're not understanding is that there's a reason that you want to build something new. It's because whatever it is you're doing now isn't working to its full capacity. And so instead of understanding the problem that your new things are broken for a reason, or your existing things are broken for a reason, which is why you want to create something new. You don't want to just create yet another broken thing. You want to really understand what the true problem you're solving is, and it's usually because you haven't really allotted enough time to develop the new idea.
And I think that's about risk and hedging, isn't it? Is that
of course?
We're not all in,
or the perception of that for sure. Yeah.
And do you think that hedging is because, well, I think I said it's because this, as you say, they're not at the source of what they're trying to solve. They just thought of an interesting thing to do, and it doesn't survive the why test, but they're going to sort of do it anyway.
Well, they thought of an interesting thing to do, and and then they say, great, how can we fit that interesting new thing into something we're already doing? Which is the building the airplane as we fly it, right? In other words, we already know how to fly this airplane, so let's just build whatever we can that kind of fits this, let's add a third wing. Well, that's stupid, but it works because because we've already got 2 wings. We might as well just build a third because that'll help. And so taking that approach usually gets you suboptimal performance because you haven't built what it would almost be like, going out and looking at all the footage we shot, for a movie we made, and looking at all the unused footage and going, well, what new movie can we make out of that? Because that's what we should do, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And often, you talked about tools earlier as well. Often it's about tools and thinking, this is shiny, I want to go do a thing, and a new channel comes up or something like that. But we don't give enough thought to what are we going to stop in order to give us the right amount of resources to actually commit to.
That's exactly right. Yes, 100% right on that.
We're so scared of stopping.
That's right.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So if I was not scared of stopping and I wanted to find out some inspiration about where I might start, where might I look for that, Robert?
You can find that on our wonderful little website called contentadvisory.net.
Splendid. And when I spin the dial on the interwebs, where am I going to find you?
You'll find me more and more these days on LinkedIn, but I would also encourage you to come listen to our little Two Chuckleheaded podcast that comes out every Friday called This Old Marketing, which we talk a lot about this stuff.
Absolutely. And I always include a link to it in the show notes, I believe. So yes, absolutely. That's one of my favorites as well on a Friday. And will you be in the bar next week?
Of course I will.
That's splendid. Thank you, mate. And hopefully... I can't. If I can do Star Trek this week, I can't do it every week.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
All right, mate. I'll see you then.
Okay.
Thank you, Robert. And aside from the links that Robert shared there, I'd also recommend taking a look at his rose-coloured glasses column on the Content Marketing Institute blog, which, of course, I will include a link to in the show notes. So that's a wrap on episode 223 of the Rockstar CMO effing marketing podcast. I've been your host, Ian Truscott. You can find links to me, Jeff and Robert, along with all the things we discussed in the show notes on rockstarcmo.com, along with our blog, newsletter, and all of our previous episodes. Thank you for dropping a dime into your podcast and jukebox, selecting our track and jiving along with us. I'd love to hear from you. So please say hello or drop us a rating or review in your favourite podcast app, or just keep listening. I'm glad you're here. Next week, Jeff will be interviewing me as I try and complete a section of a collective marketing book that's due for publication in August. And Robert will be back in the virtual bar with a cocktail and his weekly marketing thought. Until then, have a great week. And I hope you again join us here next week on Rockstar CMO FM.
This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.